to the second part of the Building Customer Intimacy series of sessions. I'm Mike Boland. I'm an analyst with BIA Kelsey. And one of the things that we've learned today and really over the last 18 months of looking at the on-demand economy, that one of the critical factors for success are these logistical systems that are facilitating the connection of buyer and seller, but not only that, but the delivery and fulfillment of something. And in a lot of cases, there's not a lot of room for error. We have these three-sided marketplaces with consumer, with service provider, and the marketplace itself that are connecting them. So what that means essentially is that in a lot of verticals, that means there's margin compression. Like I said, not a lot of room for error. So that means a key success factor, again, are these logistical systems to get to those favorable unit economics of faster deliveries and all of these different ways it's playing out. And that essentially means a few different things. Those logistical systems are a function of, in some cases, network effect. So we've seen that with Uber and Airbnb, particularly in urban areas, having that supply-demand equation balanced and kind of healthy on both sides. But the other way that really is a success factor in making that work are the things like the matching algorithms and the data science. And it's that latter part where the two panelists that we have today are really attacking this. Really bringing together a lot of consumer behavior data, but not just that, gleaning insights from that and feeding that back into a system that helps deliver something, whatever the service may be, in a more efficient manner, and again, towards those favorable unit economics. Now, what that something is different in all cases. So we actually have two panelists on this session that are really attacking this from different angles in different verticals. So I decided to actually break them up to do justice to each of their nuanced models, and so that we could achieve some depth in these discussions. So first we have David Shim, who is the CEO and founder of Placed. Now, David, you and I have been talking for a long time. I actually looked back. I probably have the wrong microphone. Why don't I grab that one?
You can grab this one.
So I looked back the other day at the first blog post I wrote about you guys, and it was in about 2012, which makes me feel old, but also it made me realize kind of some of the evolution that you guys have had. And at that point, you had just launched your Placed panels, and we'll get into what that is, with thoughts about how that would be applied towards things like targeted marketing or some of the things you're doing now around marketing attribution. So really to open things up, give some color for those unfamiliar on Placed's model, its history, and kind of what value you're providing.
Yeah, so with Placed, it's really about measuring what people do in the physical world. So the approach that we've taken is actually getting users to opt in to share their location data with Placed. So we've got about 1 in every 300 adults in the US where they've installed an app, double opted in to let us measure where they go in the physical world. And we see about 1,000 lat-long pairs per user per day. So when you look at the total numbers in terms of what we see on a daily basis, we see close to 1 billion first-party latitude and longitudes on a daily basis. So what we take that data and then we try to identify what businesses do people actually visit. So not just going in and saying were they nearby, but actually going in and saying were they at the Best Buy, the Starbucks, or the 24-hour fitness next door. And by being able to understand that data, you're kind of able to kind of roll that back into kind of the on-demand side to say, now that I know what people are doing in the physical world, how do I take action against it?
Now, as Foursquare is now trying to reinvent itself, it's actually telling that same exact story that you guys have been telling for years. They actually use the same term that we used in that 2012 blog post, which is the ComScore for the real world. It's really those real-world analytics, and that's becoming more and more valuable these days. Now, talk a little bit more about the methodology and how you're getting that. It's primarily through some of your own apps, but also a network of app developers that are using your API, and users opt in, and it's a pretty large sample. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so rather than going in and kind of saying, hey, we've got a single application and we want people to install one app, we've really taken a portfolio-based approach. So rather than the Foursquare has the one app or now two apps that they've pivoted it into, we actually started with an app called Panel App. We pay you for your location data. So just like ComScore pays you for your web activity, Nielsen pays you for your TV, we pay to actually measure where you go in the physical world. The second app that we have is called Give to Charity. There we make a charitable donation, gets us a different audience. And then we launched a program called Affiliate where 100 plus apps have actually installed our SDK and they get users to opt in to share their location data. And in exchange, the user gets premium features in their app for free. So it's really about giving that value exchange, really taking location data and treating it like a currency, and getting those users to opt in to share that data set. So it gives us more of a diverse base than if we were just reliant on one or two kind of social networking type apps.
Now, what are some of the outputs or the use cases for your direct customers, whether they be retailers or brands? You can pinpoint certain affinity groups. Someone that is visiting a Taco Bell is 20% likely to also go to Sports Authority. Things like that. What are the things that you're coming out with as an end product, and then whom do you serve mostly, and in what ways?
Yeah, when we first started, it was our analytics product called Placed Insights. So we had a number of retailers using it. They still use it today. So a good example would be on Black Friday weekend. We actually work with a number of retailers where they look at traffic by hour against not only their own stores, which they have data sets for, but they can then compare that against their competitive set. And they actually have these screens where they say, this is when a doorbuster is happening, this is when this other sales are going to occur, this is when they close their doors. And they're actually looking at how people funnel through, not just for that competitive store, but then they're saying, of the people who went into my store, what store are they going into next? And we've had clients for the last 4 years that have been using the solution, and they're taking it a little bit further every single year. So now they're starting to change things as they start to see activity. So if my Black Friday traffic is showing that 30% of my users are now going into a Best Buy, that makes me nervous because last year was only 20%. So what's actually happening here? And you actually have time to correct that, to go in and actually change that behavior.
Now that gets into my next question. It's a nice segue, thank you, into how you are connected to this overall discussion of the on-demand economy and what you're doing that is kind of on-demand-ish. And it seems like the immediacy of that data and serving that to your retail partners or to brands adds a lot of value because they can make real-time decisions. So tell me more about your kind of on-demand qualities.
Yeah, so from an on-demand perspective, it seems a little weird, right? To go in and say, hey, okay, place, they do location measurement. What does that have to do with on-demand? But when you think about it, it's really about getting data that can actually drive action in the moment. So there's a lot of dollars that are going to location-based ad targeting. It's about what are people doing in the physical world, and I actually have the ability to buy impressions when someone's nearby Costco, Best Buy, 24-hour Fitness, a Starbucks, and actually go in and try to change their behavior in that moment. So from an on-demand perspective, from a B2B side, I want to take advantage of it. It's not just about the consumer. It's a bigger pie. And I think, you're going to talk about this a little bit, but it's just a pie that it's wide open when you think about it from a B2B perspective that people aren't thinking about it that way.
Yeah. Now that real-time insights and to be able to serve the right ads in those moments where it really makes sense, how much of that is kind of programmatic versus like a human kind of gleaning those insights and making decisions on the fly?
Right now, I'd say majority, it's humans actually looking at reports and saying, this is working, let me put more dollars into this. But there's a big push on the digital side to actually go programmatic. You're starting to see more agencies, more advertisers actually bring programmatic in-house to say, I control the sales, I control the offers, I control the prices. I now want to control when that advertising goes out. So I think you're going to see in the next few years is programmatic move more aggressively and take those dollars that are more traditional and reactive versus being proactive.
Sure. Now, outside of kind of real-time insights for marketers to make decisions, it seems like there's another layer to this, which is using the historical data you have or the more recent data in the on-time data, but outside of a marketing context to make strategic or operational decisions, such as inventory management, mitigating inventory risk. One example I always like to think of is the area of franchise developments, looking at the amount of brand affinity that might be in a location or the amount of people might under-index against the amount of presence maybe a multi-location business or a chain might have. Are you finding there are any insights there as well beyond marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. So new store location opening. So if I know if someone goes to a Subway and they go to a Subway once a week, and I've categorized that audience segment, I want to see where else they go in the Seattle market. And if I start to see a concentration of Subway users, but there's no Subway within a 5-mile radius, that actually helps me make a decision to say, I should actually think about opening up a location here because the proximity of customers that are buying Subway are congregating at these places, and it's an opportunity to actually execute against that.
Sure.
And then the advertising side you get, obviously, where we just did one for a movie studio where we asked our users, what type of movies do you watch? And they said, hey, one of the options was scary movies. And then we try to identify where do those people go when they're not watching a movie. Because if you try to target an ad when someone's at a movie theater, it's too late. They can't open up their phone, or they're going to the theater, they've already decided what they're going to watch. So with that scary movie, we actually found the highest indexing places were bars. So people, when they're not watching scary movies, where if you want to find that core audience segments, it's where the nightlife is, it's where the bars are, and that's where you want to potentially advertise.
Yeah, interesting. So there's another angle to this too, which is how you are bringing that to market. I mean, with the retailers, the brands, and everyone you're serving, how is your product packaged? I'm not sure if you can talk about pricing, but essentially, what's your model for bringing this to the market?
Yeah, so with the Insights product, where it's Nielsen ComScore for the physical world, it's a seat license. So you get a seat license, you get access to the analytics. Retailers, agencies use that. We have a product called Placed Attribution, which actually connects ad exposure to in-store visitation. So did someone actually see an ad? Did they then go into the store? That's really based on a CPM, so based on usage. And we've seen great traction there. We have over 100 plus partners, names including Pandora, Weather.com, Retail Me Not, XAD, Think Near, Verve, where they're actually leveraging that technology to go back to their customer and say, here's an independent third party that can actually tie back ad exposure to store visitation. So really closing that loop and actually getting people to go in, just like BIA Kelsey does, to say it's an independent third party, and this is research just saying this is why you should invest more in the space.
Interesting. So we're about out of time in our kind of 10 minutes. We're going to invite Josh up in a second, but to close, this is a similar question I asked Nicholas from Here Maps, which is that, you know, what's your feeling on the proliferation of signals coming from lots of different sensors? The forward march of Moore's law is just putting sensors everywhere. Now, right now, your biggest signal is probably just the good old-fashioned GPS chip. But what else can you do to kind of bring a richer mosaic of insights? You know, are you interfacing with in-store beacons or any other kind of form of data that amplifies what you're already doing?
Yeah, so we use GPS as our core, but then we also use Wi-Fi, cell phone triangulation. We look at the sensor values like accelerometer, gyroscope, compass, and all those play a role in terms of actually understanding where somebody is. Because if I open up my phone right now and I look at Google Maps, it's not necessarily going to show me right here. There's brick around us, there's a lot of piping, it might show me across the street. But if I know 30 minutes before that I was walking into the building that I had GPS level accuracy, as I crossed the threshold, it went to Wi-Fi, and as I got deeper into the building, the Wi-Fi kept switching, but it stayed at galvanized, which is the location here, then I could actually go in and use all of that data to infer that I've always been here, even though my cell tower location says I'm 2 blocks away. So I think from a cell phone and a smartphone perspective, I'm actually a big believer that everything is going to come from the smartphone. So I don't think beacons will last past a year or two from now. And the reason why is there's too much work to do. There's too much activity where you have to put the beacon up, you have to replace the battery, you have to set up the signal. Versus I think the smartphone, to Moore's law, is it's getting more sensors every single day. It's doing things like measuring sleep that people didn't think about 4 years ago.
I'm also quite bearish on beacons, but more due to the opt-in friction at the user level. So we're going to hear more from you in the third part of this session, where you're going to come back and we're all going to talk. So if anyone has any questions for David, you'll still get the chance to ask them. But we're going to launch right into our interview with Josh. So Josh, why don't you come up here? So first off, tell us about Render AI. Tell us about yourself and some of the market opportunities and pain points you're solving, and then we're going to go into a quick demo to
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm from Render AI. I'm the CTO of Render AI, and I'm going to talk about video. So I'm going to talk about something kind of very specific, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how the very nature of the way video is being done on the web is going through a revolution that's going to completely change how it can be used to address customer intimacy, to address personalization, to address localization, and how that's basically a trend that's going to start showing up everywhere. That's essentially the thing we do. Just for some metrics that make this, I think, make a little bit more sense, the recent numbers tell us, these are things that we pulled up within the last few months, that 70% of the traffic, of all mobile traffic by the end of 2017, that's 70% of that's going to be video. 80% of all web traffic will be video by 2019. These are Cisco numbers. And then there's some pretty important things when you're talking about customer connection and intimacy. The conversion rates are 800%, 8 times the conversion rate when you have a landing page with video on it, regardless of what that is. 12 times the likelihood of shareability of that thing. So, you can see from what Facebook is doing that video is really kind of powering the ability to connect to people. It's what people watch. It's what people watch on mobile. The big problem is scalability. It's completely impossible or has been up to now, pretty much impossible to make a lot of videos that are really different and that actually are visual storytelling. And that's essentially the thing that we're making, and it's kind of the first of these things. So yeah, here's a little demo.
Well, first, before you go into that, I want to support what you said about the growth of videos. A few important trends I'm watching as an analyst is, millennials have an affinity for video and the kind of the emotional touch that video can provide. And that's something universal, not just specific to millennials. But also, if you look at a lot of technological trends, you see the social sharing movement that has video as a key component of that. Instagram. Facebook, of course, now getting to video. Even live video through Periscope, Facebook, and others. So the social sharing trend is launching video, but also the technology itself, and again, Moore's Law keeps coming up, but the video production capability now, the iPhone 6 shoots 4K video, so the ability to capture video, and then you have mobile broadband that's improving, so the ability to transmit it. So all of those things are just creating a fertile ground for the medium itself.
Right, in terms of the generation of this material, and I think the issue for us is, and this is, as people who come yes, out of engineering, but also long background in broadcast and television work, so it's all about visual storytelling. We look at something like this, which is kind of a classic example of the type of first-tier thing that we're attacking, and you say something like OpenTable where you have 1 million listings and these are all restaurants, and this is a classic example of what I think of as a data sheet. Yes, there are photographs. Yes, there's user-generated comments. But if you want to know something about it, you kind of are parsing through this huge thing. So what our engine does is a machine learning and AI engine, is that it parses a page like that as its input. It uses the machine learning portions to reach out for missing assets, and using not a template, but a model, one that evolves by using viewer metrics as they watch, we generate in near real time a video, and we can generate these at scale. And these videos then are not like the templated ad prop videos that you're used to seeing. These actually look like right out of the gate spots. So this is, we can play this. This is the video that was generated from that Perbaco page automatically. It's a minute long. I'll let it play out and then I'll tell you about what's in it. Everything in this essentially is data live. It comes from the information that is from today or from the last render. That means all the numbers, whatever is trending now for meals this week or today, and that you have an ability to break out at any time and actually execute the reservation, and this is optimized then to play on mobile. We render these things straight into the cloud. We pass the embed codes on. And so, kind of the essential thing to understand is that everything that's been pieced together in there is something that's been retrieved, identified, and assembled according to our story model, so that you actually have this ability to tailor individual videos at any number to specific locations, to specific. I think you get the essence of this is to shift the data sheet document web over to a video-centric web and do so in a fashion that doesn't require hand labor.
Sure. So, and as you alluded to, there are a lot of offerings out there that will piece together static assets in a more or less automated way and in a low friction, low cost way. So I think the end product speaks for itself and how you differentiate from them. What about, can you talk about, what's under the hood without giving away your secret sauce? Technically speaking, how are you doing this, and is it defensible enough to have a barrier to competition to differentiate it?
It's very different from the things that are out there now, and I think that actually that's one of the reasons that video kind of often gets a bad rap on the web, is that we're really used to a lot of push ads that are kind of ad prop ads, and they're templated, and we recognize that. You may show my hometown, but basically everything else in the video is the same. And I think the way to look at that is to say, just kind of technically, it's like a lookup table. You may have 200 assets that you can mix and match together to make people feel as if they're getting something personalized. But they're not, and they recognize that, which is why we don't like having it pushed at us. And so what we're doing instead is what we consider to be native content, meaning that when someone views this video, it looks like what they expect from the site they expect with the information that they expect. And the way we do this is not by using a static structure, which we swap assets in. We instead make a machine intelligence-controlled model that becomes the first version of this video, which assembles from the individual pages and from other locations that are related to that page. So the individual who owns the restaurant doesn't actually have to put anything into that. We put that through a panelization scheme so that essentially the machine learning begins to learn what's working and what's not. And every time that it's viewed, the metrics are fed back into the AI portion of this, the machine learning portion, which then goes to change not just what pictures are there, but what the timing is. If people stop watching at second 14, you actually are going to alter that first module so that you are picking that up.
Now, what other signals are you taking from the user consumption experience? Obviously, yeah, if someone stopped, that's a great signal of something needs to be changed 5 seconds before that or whatever the case may be. What else can you tell from just that consumption experience?
Well, that's actually one of the more interesting things is that because you can kind of think of the pieces of the story as each being connected to each other by an internal API. So that means from the standpoint of designing what constitutes a story, in the simplest version of a story, it's a listing. Yeah. Here I am, here's what I do. But you can also design the videos so that they are essentially engaging the user. If it's a real estate site, it might show, it might make every day, it might make a video for a person who's logged in that has the 3 most likely homes that they'd be interested in. They could also say, I like this one, I don't like this one. Mm-hmm. What do you like about this? Well, so that's how you kind of create this concept of the model that you start with. And as these things are viewed and changed, there's essentially a new instantiation is created. So there is no maximum number of iterations or versions of these videos. They live like little, like alive animals, essentially, evolving on the web as long as we let them.
Now, who is your customer? Are you talking to the Open Tables of the world or what's the name of the restaurant, directly to the
Turbobaco? Yeah, no, we are really looking, this is kind of, for us, it's a B2B. I think the way to think of it is as a foundational technology that we tend to talk to, for example, the directories. We're saying, if you really want, let me give you an example. Currently, you look at Yelp, and one thing Yelp tried to do that a lot of sites have tried to do is they've said, all right, we have all these people who list what they've got. These are our local people. We want this intimate relationship with them. If they want a video, they can buy our video package. They pay, $200 or $300 a month, or sometimes less, but it's generally very expensive. They send out a crew who shoots this video. Yes, they do create a video. It tends not to be very professional because they're very, expensive.
Yeah, of course.
To make well, and they're made one time and they are not changed.
Yeah.
And so the issue with those is that it creates a lot of dissatisfaction. The users don't like it. They don't have a way of changing it. They don't feel connected to it. And so, I think our whole idea is to kind of open that up and make that so that it really pertains directly to
Now, video is interesting. I've been looking at video for small businesses for years. And the interesting part is there's a thing we talk about in local advertising, which is called the vanity factor. Now, we talk about also ROI and perceived ROI. Perceived ROI goes through the roof with the vanity factor that is prevalent among small businesses. It's prevalent among restaurants, lawyers. It's huge in lawyers. Exactly. They always need the park bench or the full page yellow page ad. So video resonates with them for that reason.
Right. And one of the big issues with that is that you want to be able to, the problem is that there's a big line that gets drawn between the do it for you and the do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of people really have this interest. I would like to have this beautiful video, but if you say do it yourself and you give them a bunch of tools for dragging things around, of which there are many versions out on the web, what comes out of that isn't that valuable. What we can actually do with this, and this is kind of one of the kind of cool ways to interest your customers and to build that intimacy, is you can blast one of these videos out to them, no questions asked, and say, do you like this? Here's something that represents your business. From the vanity standpoint, if you're missing your own face or your own storefront, just drop them in this folder.
Yeah.
And tomorrow's video will contain your assets, but which have been analyzed and placed and edited correctly based on kind of our AI routines. So it kind of solves this problem of people feeling that something made for them in static doesn't feature them correctly, and that they're paying monthly for something that, doesn't really feel like theirs, they actually have a way of almost editing it. But all they're really doing is feeding more fodder into the into the engine. And just as a quick aside, one big problem with this is what happens when you think about it, what happens when you have listings that don't have a lot of assets? What happens with a page that doesn't have assets? And that's part of what the engine does is, we come out of broadcast, essentially. We're storytellers who, who've been making, usually blue chip stuff for PBS. And so we know a lot about provenance and rights. And so the idea is to accumulate an image database, which we already have, that is slowly built up as the engine analyzes the images, et cetera, on the web and the clips. And it can build a full piece of video like that. If it can't find the assets on the site, it will find generic assets that fit, essentially prompting the client to go, look what they've done for me. Here's something else for you. So essentially, the idea is that you create a dialogue between you and your local consumer, and that's what has not been doable with video before.
So we're actually almost out of time. So David, why don't you come on back up, and we'll have just a few kind of concluding thoughts. But also, Josh, I want to ask you this similar question that I asked David, which is, how do you and you already alluded to this, how do you plug into this discussion of on-demand? We spent most of the time talking about the strengths of your product, but not necessarily as tied to the on-demand economy. So the question really is, how has the on-demand culture affected the overall process of video production and consumption? So that question includes both the producers of video and the consumers and the millennials that we did talk about. But
absolutely, and I think the issue is that the real-time nature of all this kind of points out the on-demand connection. Local and on-demand to me is basically saying, I want something that tells me the story that has great levels of detail of this local place at this specific time, and I want it now. And there was never a way before to do that with video, even in the templated ad props. Now, simply requesting that information gives us enough to go on to generate something that's in real time and feels as if it was made for you. So it's really imagining customized video, but it's brought down to the neighborhood or house level. There's no level of granularity that's too small.
Sure. So I want to give both of you guys a chance to give some final words. But one kind of common element I see with you guys is like I said in the intro, the data, to really feed into these systems to create a more efficient delivery of something. And you guys are working on different versions of that something. But also, it's an interesting part about what I call phase 2 of the on-demand economy. Phase 1 was, we learned so many things in phase 1, but among the many differences we're going to see in phase 2, going into different verticals, but also becoming more enterprise geared. Most of the things we're talking about are consumer geared things, but moving into the enterprise, it seems like you're both empowering either marketers or retailers or the directories of the world to do something in an on-demand fashion using that data. So what do you guys feel is missing from the on-demand economy that you may be addressing or you may be observing in terms of that kind of underserved, I shouldn't say underserved, because one of the first on-demand players was Amazon Web Services, right? But the enterprise, what do you guys feel about that as part of the on-demand economy?
I think the big thing is just having the ROI. So a great example is look at the apps. When apps first came out, a lot of consumer apps, everyone loves them. Then corporations started to roll out apps, hey, expense reporting, expense tracking. And then a secondary ecosystem came out, marketing tech, where when you open up the app and it says, do you like this app? Do you want to give it better ratings, et cetera? That came after the fact, but there are huge companies that are coming up from that. And I think it's because the ROI is there. They've got the customers on board. Now they're trying to optimize that. And I think when you think about it from an on-demand in the physical world, it's really kind of getting that ROI. Because if you can actually say for every dollar that you spend on Render AI, that it's going to drive $5 in sales, that's the closed loop that will get people to spend more money. Before it's kind of like, hey, it's a click, it doesn't really matter. It's closing that loop that really is going to drive it.
So Josh, I want to give you the chance to give the final word, but first I want to give the audience the chance to jump in if there are questions. If not, we will move on. Right here, Buzz.
I guess my question is, I was thinking back on your stats, 800%, and then 1200%. Tell me that one more time.
Yeah, and this is Cisco information that's reasonably recent. That you have 8 times the conversion from any landing page that has video on it as opposed to one that doesn't.
So that's, I guess my question is, does that mean video that auto runs or video that's instantly
Well, I think the easiest way to think of it is that if you arrive at a page and that page has video on it, whether it autoplays or not, whether it's embedded or not, the simple presence of the video is this incredible convergence driver.
So I was just looking, as you were talking, I was looking at our homepage, and we've got pointers to the video. Basically, if you want to see how it works, click here.
Right.
But I think I hear you saying that it shouldn't say click here, it should be right
You
there.
still have to have, I think the underpinning concept is that you still have to have a visual component that says there is a story waiting right here, whether it plays at you right away or not,
Right.
that leads the customer into the conversion step.
So, and that should be the very first thing that somebody sees.
Right, and it's an interesting thing if you look at the trouble, we were just talking about this, if you look at the trouble that that Yelp has had over the last couple of years, and you look at the competition, it's the kind of pumping up of the visual components, and the front and centering of very intelligently designed video is the trend that you're seeing, and I think they're trying to milk those numbers, and that's actually when you look at the video packets that are being shipped, I think that's clear that's what's happening.
One big trend we see in web design is being brought on by Squarespace and Wix and others is the video header that auto plays with no sound, and just having more animated web pages that draw people in. We see a lot of embedding too, but I think that's an excellent question where I think it also feeds into the trend we're seeing in the on-demand economy of compressing what was otherwise a convoluted process. If you look at search, for example, it's search, 10 blue links, drill down, subdirectory, read reviews, and then maybe pick up the phone. The onset of just compressing that into things, having things more upfront, buttons, action buttons, videos, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, to close out that thought, I think that's what we really learned from producing. When for the years that we made television, we continued to do so. We learned, you don't have the option of getting the feedback before you show the picture, and so you learn after the fact whether it was any good or it completely sucked. But what we learned was that the trick of getting that visual story up front to make the engagement was the entire game.
Yeah.
And do you have any thoughts on the autoplay versus just having it there?
Well, a lot of people say that Facebook, I mean, this is, I think, a pretty popular thought, that Facebook's kind of across-the-board implementation of autoplay.
And Instagram, by association, they're doing it too.
Right, exactly, was the thing that broke this open. Because everybody, when they said they were going to do this, spoke against it, saying, I don't want that stuff played at me. But once it started playing in the feeds, people really realized that they were seeing essentially all of their cable channels or all the things that might be interesting playing as they scrolled. So it's kind of like the ideal channel guide. You see the picture as you're going. And I think it ended up being so much more popular than I think Facebook knew this, but then users expected, that it's kind of pushed us into this.
Well, they've also nailed the technical integration of the fact that the video will stop. They have a vertical feed. The experience has a vertical speed, and it stops and starts at the right time, as opposed to a static page where, in some cases, can be viewed as obtrusive if that thing just starts playing, especially with the volume. Sound is another key part of this.
Exactly, and I think this is what the native point is about, is that if you feel something's being pushed at you that you don't want, that's not intimacy, that's kind of enmity.
I mean, I guess the test would be A/B it and C converting.
Right.
Mitch, you would like one more question? Sure, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, it's great that you guys are doing video with this. What's the audio component on this, and is there personalization and there's opportunity for audio here?
The audio is
also
huge. The audio is huge, and it's just as important a portion of the engine. And there are kind of two ways to think about how you would approach this. And it's obviously not just this technology, it's the future of all this. One is, if we're trying to generify something, you try and stay away from language. Also because on mobile, if you're on the subway, you're not really necessarily going to listen. But there are huge opportunities in classic localization. For example, you imagine a real estate site, and you'd like to have videos of some high-end commercial building, but you actually need it in 20 languages, and you need it to be culturally appropriate for different countries. Those are essentially spins of the same model. That is something that does not require a human being to do.
So as you think about that, male and female voices, I mean, are you talking about auto-generating these voices through a computer algorithm?
We're trying, as good filmmakers, we're trying to stay away from a lot of blah, blah, blah for the visuals. You really want them to speak for themselves, and you want to bring in localized text if you can, once again, so you don't require the audio. But I think, at this point, our tests show that it's much better to have true human voices put into an array than it is to use synthesis, because even the best synthesis, you feel like Hal is trying to convince you to buy something.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this has been fascinating. We need to move on. Please join me in thanking the panel.
Yeah.